The book of Ecclesiastes is not the most popular document in the Bible. Although it is not nearly as boring as, for example, Leviticus, with all those rules and regulations, all those do's and don'ts, formulated when a social order for the Israelites was being introduced and established, or those sections in the scriptures that list begat after begat after begat in an attempt to codify genealogical data, real or imaginary, Ecclesiastes is a downer. You see, Ecclesiastes presents a pretty negative view of life for our modern day and age when we want everything to be as positive as possible, even though we know that is not the way it always is. Indeed, the Ecclesiastes approach is such that it almost didn't make it into the Old Testament. I guess they back then didn't like all that negativity either. But just as the authorship of Genesis is ascribed to Moses and the authorship of Psalms is ascribed to David, the authorship of Ecclesiastes is ascribed to Solomon. So those determining what made it into the canon decided that they could not leave out one of Israel's greatest kings. Of course, the possibility that Solomon really wrote Ecclesiastes runs from minimal to impossible, while we know that Moses did not write Genesis and that perhaps only some of the Psalms were really created by David. No, it's a matter of tradition and folklore, and a little like Michael Jordan writing his autobiography with the help of someone who was really a writer. But like Moses and David and Solomon, Michael Jordan has star appeal, and the attachment of his name to the work sells copies. Long before Rick Warren and Joel Osteen, it was Norman Vincent Peale who wrote the wildly popular blockbuster bestseller, The Power of Positive Thinking. So if Ecclesiastes reflects what might be called the power of negative thinking, how long do you think it as a volume would be sitting on the shelves of Barnes & Noble in the self-help section before the management decided to throw the dusty and droopy copies away? Let's talk about the message of Ecclesiastes so you can easily see what I'm referring to. The writer is called the teacher, and he starts with vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Now what does that mean? The New English Bible translates vanity as emptiness, and the Anchor Bible reads vapor of vapors. A characteristic of vapor is that it disappears. And Ecclesiastes speaks consistently about the transitory nature of life, of possibility, of wealth. Here's what the teacher says about life. He says that wickedness rules in the place of justice and righteousness. He says that for those who are oppressed, there is no advantage for one official to be under the oversight of a higher official, or for that higher official to be under the oversight of a still higher official. Apparently they are all corrupt. He says that there is nobody to dry the tears of the downtrodden. They have no comforter. He says that often the wicked do much better than the good, and that even in death there is no advantage to being righteous, because death is death, regardless of how one lived, and sometimes the wicked are remembered with greater affection and renown than are the good. He says that we have no control over the future, so we are clearly at its mercy. Whenever the teacher speaks about fate, it is closely linked with death, and he mercilessly reveals how life grows darker as we get older. So is it any wonder that the reader of such observations thinks about life as being futile? We would all like our world to be better than it is. We would like everything to be positive and bright. And then we look around us and see how unrealistic such wishes are. We look at what is happening in the Near East with the brutal and unconscionable success of ISIS, and at the never-ending conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We look at what is happening in the bloody confrontation between Russia and Ukraine. We look at what is happening in various parts of Africa where tribal warfare is anything but a thing of the past. The only difference is that now it is nation against nation and religion against religion instead of group against group. We look at what is happening all over the globe, where the new norm seems to be the use of violence and terrorism to get whatever one wants. We look at crime rates, and particularly in this country, the cry for unrestricted firearm possession so we can protect ourselves from all those baddies who usually turn out to be the other guys with guns who are just as scared as we are. So there is the very real fear that sooner or later our world will be blown to hell and back, and there is nothing that we can do about it. Rights and wrongs are all mixed up. Values that were once taken for granted don't seem to be around anymore. The great society of the 60s appears to be a myth in a dog-eat-dog and whatever it takes to get ahead world. And the two recent television series about the 80s and the 90s present little more than the social agonies which have plagued and structured life as we know it. The future seems so very uncertain. Is it any wonder then that people want to get whatever they can before it is too late? So are we totally without hope? Is that what Ecclesiastes is saying? Not really. But it does offer a slant on life that appears to be at odds with what we seem to hold to be important as well as vital and essential to our happiness. Wisdom teaches, suggests Ecclesiastes, that there is more to existence than having the biggest piece of candy, that there is a difference between profit and enjoyment, and that to have it all is in many ways to have nothing. Wisdom teaches that God is still God, and that people can and certainly should rely on each other. Isn't it true that we have a tendency to think that having more will make us happy, and that if we have the most, well, doesn't that mean then that we will be the happiest? Look around you. Is such a concept or belief really supported by the reality we face every day of our existences? If such a belief or concept were true, then why are so many people who have so much so often unhappy? And if such a belief or concept were true, then why do so many people who have so much and should thus be happy always struggle and strive to get more and more than they could ever need, because they already have more than they could ever need? So obviously the acquisition of things does not lead in and of itself to a full and satisfying life. Well, perhaps and sometimes the problem goes beyond what I have just said and is or includes our desire to be loved. And too often we want to be loved by anonymous people. We wish for the affection and adoration of folks we do not know. Hence, to some extent, the popularity of approaches like Facebook. If you are on Facebook, and I am not now denigrating Facebook, even though I do not choose to be on it, if you are on Facebook, how many friends do you have? I have trouble counting or remembering the number of times I have received an email telling me that so-and-so wants me for a friend, and this person who wants me for a friend is someone I've never even heard of. A complete stranger, at least to the best of my knowledge. Now, surely I've got enough real friends and don't need a whole bunch of Facebook friends. Friends I don't know and will probably never meet. I can't help but think about Robin Williams in both these connections, possessions and acclaim. It is always a shock when we hear or read about individuals having committed suicide. And of course, we cannot know what demons drove them to take their own lives or the pain they experienced before they decided to end it all. But it is even harder to understand when it happens to someone who seems to have everything. Surely, at least on the surface, that appears to have been true of Robin Williams. He was rich, he was famous, he was loved, he was respected. I would call him one of the greatest comedic geniuses who ever lived, as did his fans and peers. How strange then to have a man who could make so many people laugh so hard take his own life because he was so unhappy. And he suffered severe depression most of his life, and certainly all during his professional career. If anyone had friends, it was Robin Williams. The question, though, is what kind of friends? And were they enough? We all need to be loved, but we need to be loved by people we know. Our hope of having something of lasting value must be based to at least some degree on the bond of human solidarity, or ultimately all else will be vanity or vapor. We can like things, but we can't really love them, and they certainly cannot love us back. We can like acclaim, but we can't really love it, and it certainly cannot love us back. And no matter how much fans might idolize and or applaud us, there is at best only a rather limited and superficial value if the relationships are not personal. The apparently negative thinking then of Ecclesiastes has what we might call positive goals. Human relationships can provide the basis for a joyful life enhanced by an appreciation of life and a commitment to live life to the fullest. So much of what we make of our existences depends upon what we have inside. It seems that one day the Dalai Lama was having lunch at a restaurant with people who were interviewing and entertaining him. As they were finishing their meal, their young waitress, who with tangled blonde hair and a beaded headband began clearing their table, stopping briefly to listen to the conversation. Then, in an unprofessional but earnest manner, she stopped what she was doing and sincerely asked the Dalai Lama that profound question, "What is the meaning of life?" The table went silent. This was the kind of question he might be in a position to answer, but which most folks were reluctant to ask. While leaning forward with raised finger and focusing on her as if she was the only person in the world, he immediately responded with, "Meaning of life is happiness. Hard question is not what is meaning of life. That is easy question to answer. No, hard question is what makes happiness. Money, big house, accomplishment, friends, or," he paused, then continued, "compassion and good heart. This is question all human beings must try to answer. What makes true happiness?" He gave that last question a peculiar emphasis and then fell silent, gazing at her with a smile. Apparently he had satisfied her because she thanked him, finished stacking the dirty dishes and cups, and took them away. Compassion and good heart. And won't compassion and a good heart lead to close and satisfying relationships? It is difficult to speak of the value of human relationships without making them standards by which we total our wealth in terms of the number of friends we claim to have, or by setting up columns of profit and loss within those relationships. But that is neither healthy nor helpful. There is no quantitative method of judging relational wealth, only qualitative. And that rejects any profit we might want to claim. Too often Christians try to dismiss Ecclesiastes as a picture of life before grace or before resurrection. Some theologians speak of the gain of immortality as the focus of faith. The teacher would say that anyone who accepts Christ as a shortcut to salvation is suffering an illusion. That of great importance is how one lives life, especially in relationship to others. And didn't Jesus himself indicate that in order to save one's life, one must be prepared to lose it? Lose it? Lose what? The positive life ultimately described by Ecclesiastes becomes possible only through the rejection of the empty promises offered by gain and achievement. These might not be bad, but they are not enough. After urging the full enjoyment and productive use of life, the teacher of Ecclesiastes has one final recommendation for the overcoming of its futility. Fear God and keep his commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. And I would add that the commandments of God are far more than just a list of do's and don'ts. They are a guideline to complete and fulfilling existence, a guideline which includes the value of the search for happiness through meaningful relationships. Everything else must go as primary goals and concerns. Think about it, and then act upon it.